Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of the show is to provide chess players and chess fans with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world. You can send these questions in advance, and that would be to an email. That's our favorite way of getting questions. And the email is askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at CHESSCLUB.com. So that's askimwatson@chessclub.com. The IM stands for International Master. All right, you can also send a question to my handle. I keep getting these, so it's kind of fun. I almost feel like not mentioning them, but people do like to do it this way. If you're an ICC member, you can message me at John L. Watson. That's one word, JOHNLWATSON. And I've also gotten references to games that way. So that's another way you can either ask me a question or send me a game. And in fact, that's the interesting thing about the show is I'm getting more games and fewer questions, so you might be interested in doing that. People like seeing games shown, and so you can send me your own games. You can send me actually games that just attracted your attention by other people, either very good players or low players, doesn't really matter. You can send me analysis if you want to look at some analysis. Openings are very popular on this show, questions about openings. And in fact, I should mention that last week someone asked me about updating my list of topics, opening topics on the show, and I didn't quite understand because I just updated it, as I do pretty much every week, with the last week's show, and he meant the full list, the master list. At least I assume he meant that. So this week I actually updated that master list. So the last posting I have on my Facebook page, John L. Watson, this time 3 words, JOHN space L space WATSON. On that timeline, I just posted an update of all of the openings that we've covered for the last 2 years. So it's a big long list. You can go there and check it out. And message me or send me an email if you have problems finding that. Some people have trouble with Facebook finding the page or getting permission to go on or something like that. There's some sort of odd thing that sometimes gets in the way. So, what else? The other thing you can do is ask questions live right now on the chat, which I'm looking over at. Elliot is on. Hello, International Chess Master Elliot Winslow. And Ears is on. We saw 2 of his games last week. So, and Alan's not on. What's going on here? Oh, amazing. He must be, let's hope there hasn't been a serious accident or something. He's always on. Okay, so let me, what else do I need to kind of catch up on from last week? I mentioned the ICC articles that you might be interested in that are open to everybody, so you don't have to be an ICC member. And to get to those, you go to www.chessclub.com/article. So those are summaries of recent events or commentaries about chess and chess news by the producer of this show, actually, and they're definitely worth a look. You can have fun with that. It's a good way to catch up on what's going on in the chess world, and it's often linked to some commentary, like a show that's been on ICC, for example, and it's free. Okay, what else? Also in the previous show, just to do a little catch up here, we talked about the very, very recent development in the English opening after all these many years. The chess is sort of always has surprises and fun, just when you think you sort of know everything. So here's the old line of the main, one of the old main lines of the English opening, and that's the reverse dragon, which is extremely popular. One of the best defenses against the old, what's called the 4 knights line of the English. And here, Grischuk against Elyanov, as was pointed out by a viewer, made this move, and he was asking about this move. And I mentioned that I'd seen that, and I'd seen that other top super GMs had played the same move right afterwards. This is all within the last month or so. And so therefore I assumed it was probably a pretty good move because people had had time to check it out and thought whether it was good or not. And so I did. I looked at it this week. I couldn't remember who those people were. And it turned out that it was used right afterwards by Adams, and then by Caruana in 2 different games, and then also by Karyak. And so we have 4 or 5 top games with this bishop c5 move. Now you might think, well, that's the most natural move in the world to play bishop c5. Why not, right? It's what you would do in a reverse dragon position. But I don't know. I guess people just thought there was going to be a timely d4 or knight takes e5 or something, because if you look at Megabase, for example, you'll find tens of thousands of games after knight takes d5, and you'll find things that aren't just the usual move. I mentioned last week the usual move is this, which has a nice effect of covering that square again, so that d4 becomes at least very difficult to enforce. But there's also moves that have been played. I think Bronstein played this for years, and there's a lot of sort of in-betweenish moves people have made. There are quite a few possibilities here, actually, that are not particularly common but are played. One of them is not this. This has been played only a couple of times in all of Megabase chess history, amazingly so. And then recently it's obviously been discovered to be perfectly fine. So interesting. I think maybe people were afraid that there'd be a knight takes e5 tactic, but you'll notice that if he tries to do something like that immediately, it's just going to lose because of a bishop b4 thing. Well, maybe not lose, but it's probably not going to be. I think, actually, let me think about that. Okay, so knight takes here. Oh, that's right. Here's how it goes. If you keep taking things, there's going to be a knight f2 at the end. So or even a queen f2 in this case. So that would be awful for white, right? Probably losing a queen or something. And if you play bishop takes, then, and now take this back. Now if you take back this way, then at the very least there's a very easy, it's got to be equality, probably better than equality because you have the bishops. That position looks pretty safe. Even if white did end up taking one of these pawns, the bishops would be very strong. Anyway, I'm sure these super grandmasters who've played this have looked at knight takes e5 a lot, but basically this position turns out to be okay for black, and I assume that's originally why people thought it wouldn't work, and so they didn't even consider playing bishop c5, like sort of why risk it. Anyway, interesting that any of that could have happened at all. What have we got here? Scott Ladd from Colorado. Hi. Yes, we saw each other in recently. Let me just see what we've got here. Ah, there we go. They're everywhere. Here's Mechanics, no less. Elliot's at the Mechanics. That's in San Francisco. It's a chess club, one of the few remaining chess clubs. We have one here in San Diego that's a permanent building, a permanent fixture, its own building. Mechanics is very similar. It's a permanent floor in a building, which has been there for ages and is devoted completely to chess, along with the amazing Mechanics Chess Library in San Francisco in the same building, which is huge, probably about as big as almost anything, any non-private library besides, well, there's the Cleveland Public Library collection, and then the Mechanics Library collection is just terrific. Okay, this line equals over the board headache. Now, as I say, I've been sent a bunch of games this week, so maybe we should even move on to that. Although I do have a couple questions. One viewer asks that it says, I hope you'll talk a little bit about Garry Kasparov's result. Garry Kasparov's result, that means in the recent St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. Joel Benjamin, this is a quote, seems to think it proves that he could still compete at the highest level if not dominate there. I guess I disagree with that. I don't think one tournament proves much of anything one way or another, but it does have some, I think, bad indications for him. Somebody was saying, well, yeah, I kind of agree with Yermo, who talked about how some people were claiming that he could have won every game. Kasparov himself said he could have won every game years ago in his prime or something. But he says the competition is just, Yermo says the competition is much better now. He says that's just plain silly, and I agree with him. I think that Yermo makes a really good point, which is that his openings were just excellent, better than probably any other players, which is kind of funny. He was either really well prepared or they were scared of, they just wanted to get a game and assumed that they could beat him later or something like that. But his openings were tremendous and his endgames were fine. And I thought in general he played fine, but he said basically he thought his mind just didn't work as fast. He said he's older and his mind just didn't operate as quickly. And so he would get outplayed essentially in most sort of neutral positions or even ones that he was much better in. because he was a little slow. And I don't know if you get faster just because you're playing a little more in terms of basic things like that. So I suspect that if he was going to play in a classical tournament, he might actually do worse than he did in this rapid and blitz. And this is not because I have anything against Kasparov. I think I was one of the first people very early on. I said I thought he was probably the greatest player that had ever played, and I think he's just a complete genius. But I think age does get to you, and I think that the idea that just because he had winning games out of the opening and he didn't win them, he would therefore do much better if he played the same tournament again, or if he played some classical tournament or had more time to think or something. I don't think any of that follows. I think he showed all the signs of being a slower calculator and a slower assessor and a slower player, like most of us are when we get older. That's just my opinion. But and I also think he wouldn't get those great openings if he played a classical tournament against these guys. He'd get very, like they all do. Nobody gets big openings advantages anymore. So he'd just get neutral positions where he had a big long fight ahead of him, and he had to play better than his opponents, who are younger and more match tough or tournament tough than he is. And I've got a funny feeling they just outcalculate him at key periods, just like they did in these tournaments, in these rapid and blitz tournaments. And so, no disrespect to Garry Kasparov, who I still think is the greatest player who's ever played the game. So, and I did say that, as I say, I was saying that way before other people were kind of admitting that. Um, and so I just don't, I think it's just typical that younger players are, well, they're better anyway. I think the competition in general is better. That's what Yermo said. He just thinks players play better now. And that's true of all sports, and that's been true throughout chess history. Players have just gotten better and better. And I just think that's the reality, and you'd have to really convince me otherwise with some really solid examples. Okay, Elliot's saying that reminds me to play in a blitz tournament tomorrow. You play faster if you play more. True, but I think you'd be surprised. I don't think he showed all the signs of a better player at all. I disagree. I think he didn't. I think he showed signs of typically not being outcalculated by his opponents. His opponents played better than he did, and one reason it wasn't even worse is because his openings were so good. And I think you'd be, I think that's true. They can't go as fast. I agree with Ears 61. He says they have more potential to get confused. The way Yermo put it is he was scared of blundering. He thought he was scared of blundering. He thinks that's what happens when you're older. You get scared of making big mistakes, and so you have to play slower to cover more of the tactics. So anyway, it's just a matter of opinion, but it is funny because I think Harsfi was also saying obviously his results were lower than they deserved to be or something, and I just think that's not true at all. I don't see that. I don't think it follows at all. I think if he had gotten terrible openings and then come back and gotten a bunch of winning positions and maybe just somehow or lost several games just because of the openings, then you could say, hey, wait a minute. If he studied a lot and he came back to play normally, he could improve that aspect of his game, and you don't have to be a genius, you don't have to be young to get better at the opening, for example, and do better than he did. But in fact, that was the best part of his game, as everybody seems to say, but they just draw different conclusions from that. Okay. A bit. Okay. MVL played Poison Pawn. Queen b6, go over a bit. Oh, gee. Yeah, I'm not a Najdorf expert. I'm sure Elliot, for example, knows much more about this. He's talking about this opening here. Now, we're going to go over some games today, but he's talking about the Najdorf Poison Pawn variation, which has been around for 1 billion years. I'm having trouble with my mouse here, so excuse me if I'm kind of slow with this. He's talking about the old Bishop g5 line. She disappeared for a while and then got very popular again with Queen b6. And the poison pawn, except that he's talking about playing h6 first, right? Is that right? I got to read the question again. h6 bishop 4 and then queen b6. Okay, reasons for this. Well, one reason is kind of primitive, but I think I'm right, Elliot, that if you play, for example, a knight b3 line to protect your b pawn, then the f pawn hangs. So that's one reason, right? That it's nice to throw that in. The other reasons are very technical, I think, because they have to do with very, very concrete, specific tactics that occur after this move, or even in the f5 lines, right? So I think, unfortunately, and I'm not really competent to speak to that, but maybe Elliot can confirm that, but I think it's just the tactics end up slightly differently. Well, why not? Because the bishop is no longer coordinating this way. On the other hand, the bishop might have a better place to go to on f2, so there's trade-offs. but black decided that they like certain positions. But I think that one with knight b3 is a sort of a very, very basic beginning reason um, that this probably isn't played. Okay, Elliot says h6 on any of the next 6 moves. In other words, it's a very, very, very complicated question, and I'm not the right one to answer it, and I don't think I could answer it quickly in any case. So the thing to do is just look at a lot of games with and without h6 and compare them. By the way, just to put context into that, for years people didn't play h6, although actually real early on, I think there was a couple games, right, Elliot? Back in the 1950s or something, you saw a couple games of this. But then it was soon replaced with the poison pawn proper, this line. And all this sort of thing would happen. And then e5 was initially the big move, playing tons and tons of games with e5. And then as that sort of started getting, and then things started changing. There were more f5 based lines, and all kinds of other things started happening. So, and of course, knight b3 lines like the old Spassky line and all this stuff. So I'll just leave it at that, and I just say basically you want to look that up. Oh, and a3. A3 has been played recently. Queen d3 was played quite a bit a few years ago, and Caruana played it against Nakamura, right? I actually analyzed this at one point, and I agree with Caruana in his notes that this is really a pretty harmless line, but Hikaru didn't play it right at all. But yeah, this is the other way you can play it. I think it's especially true after h6. Sorry. I think h6 it's better because you have more control over g6. So in this position, queen d3 is a more interesting move because there's lines where you play e5 and then you get this queen g6. You get that square. Which means there's knight f6 ideas, there's knight e6 ideas, things like that. I don't think it's any better than queen d2, but that's just my opinion from what I've seen. Also, the notes to that game with Caruana and Nakamura seem to indicate that Nakamura was just fine. The other move we just talked about was a3. The idea is to trap the queen if the queen takes the pawn. Now the queen has no retreat square. On the other hand, a3 takes an extra tempo, and it's just another way of playing. It's just another version of how to play the poison pawn. You can, and what else is there? Well, there's, yeah, okay, not knight b3 in this position. Let me see, e5, then f5, too many forced draw lines. Yeah, the f5 lines had too many forced draw lines. I agree. Then bishop e2 and bishop f6, and now back to e5. Yes, that's right. That's exactly what's been going on. Yes. I don't know about the f5 lines anymore. What's been happening, Elliot? Because I don't see them anymore. I assume that those forced draws are still considered true. I mean, they're also computer worked out, right? But okay. So enough for that. Let me go and keep going because I want to show people's games that they sent. I don't want to ignore those. We have. Oh yeah, and I was just saying, okay, about that question about Kasparov's. Yeah, as I say here, I think his opponents just moved more quickly and played more accurately in the complications. Because I know Ronan Harsvi also said that he had these wonderful openings and he threw away some wins, so therefore he'd be much better normally. But I don't understand that reasoning. I think that's the opposite. Okay, let's do a game by Jonathan Russell. He sent me a couple games actually, and let's see. I've got one up right in front of me. He is, oh, what is he? He's black, right? Black, or is this possible? Okay, so this is a strange kind of line where black tries to take over the center here, do something in the center. So this d5 move is very odd, but I guess playable. Interesting move. Didn't really think about the opening very much. Black's lost time in the opening. I guess he's trying to play it almost like a Scandinavian, you know, with takes and queen d6. I would think white should just play here, though. This is crazy. I think white would be better here just because he's taking over the center. Small point. I'm not that worried about the opening. This, however, was a relatively slower game. It wasn't like a blitz game. It was more like I think a 45-30 game on ICC. Okay, so white's just developing normally and playing normally, and black takes over the center. Actually, now black's position looks okay. So I think the whole idea of g3 and bishop g2 is probably not very much. As long as you can stop this move d4, there's nothing wrong with black's development at all here. I think black should be fine. Notice he tried to stop knight b5 tricks by playing a6. So I think now black's position's fine. White makes normal dragon-y kind of moves. That's a funny move. Usually you would play h3 because you want to play bishop e3 and you don't want to be hassled with knight g4. but then he doesn't play bishop e3, so I'm not, now he plays a3, so I think he should play bishop e3 probably. So these are kind of slow moves, and black is not only equal now, he might even be starting to become better. Makes a nice aggressive move. I don't know if these are best moves, but and that's always a natural response in the English Opening, because you're thinking about kicking away the knight, but you don't want to let him exchange. Okay, so black plays there. Probably not the most accurate move. Maybe just maybe rook b8 was a little bit better as it turned out. Knight c4 is a good move, and takes and plays c6, blocking off that long diagonal. But now white has two bishops, so black needs something sort of concrete to play here. And he plays b4. That is not a good move, because black could simply play here now, and it's very hard to defend that square. Isn't that funny? It's very odd, because you've also got to defend from the knight coming in here if the queen moves up. So I think that would be a strong move. But you know, this is a fairly fast game. So rook fd8, probably not the best move. And then that's definitely not the best move. White should just develop here, kick the knight away, and then play here. And now we're in great shape. White's got a sort of standard classical advantage in the endgame with his two bishops. You know, not necessarily winning, although but clear. Let me say clear advantage, but not necessarily decisive if black defends well. But you see, these are beautiful pieces, and white can expand on the queen side. But instead, white played bishop g5. Not sure even quite what the point is. And black played queen e6. Excellent move. That's our hero here too. Well, way to go, Jonathan. That's on the right side. Super move, because all of a sudden this is attacked. And guess what? Knight f3 check attacking the queen is in the cards too. So white plays, and if queen d3, then we have knight here, winning material. So white naturally plays e3, hoping for knight f check and takes. But after that move, this pawn is still hanging. So there's some real problems going on here. White tries queen e2, and oh, I'm sorry. There's a tactic here. Black missed a tactic. And this is a question of always looking at your most forcing moves. That move makes a lot of sense, even if you haven't done a super analysis, because you win a pawn and you're threatening a whole piece. So that move has to be taken seriously. It turns out that's very strong, because this position is tough, because you're actually threatening a second pawn now. And there's not much other way to play it. There's not another good way to play it, because if you play there, you've got that knight b3 move again, attacking the rook and the queen. So there was a tactical win here, or at least win of a pawn or two. But instead he retreated, and that meant white was back in the game. And let's just look at some moves. These are very natural moves, exchanging things off on the d file. The only open file, you don't want to give it to your opponent. And yeah, here I was thinking white might want to play something like knight here, because he wants to play c5 and knight c4, but that's just a thought. There's nothing wrong with knight c3 at all. I think white's a little better now, especially because black forces him into this sequence, and that knight's very well placed there. Same problem. Now there's opposite colored bishops, but when you have extra pieces like knights and queens, those bishops might be just fine. It might be fine for white to have opposite colored bishops, especially because black's bishop is on the same color as its center pawn, and white also has some extra space here. So that's a nice move. I like these moves. These are all good moves for white. And it's a little hard for black to coordinate. And now white makes a funny move. Actually, it's interesting here that there are tactics here. There are crazy tactics like this kind of thing. But I'm not that convinced. Check. And then you win your piece back by pinning this knight. But then it's very hard to actually get a serious attack going. I suspect black's okay here. The computer loves white there, but can't find any way to win if you just keep playing moves. So he plays that instead. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's probably reasonable. And white plays here, which certainly makes sense. Black plays here. Okay, so here's the point of the game where white has this beautiful outpost, and is trying to figure out how to convert. Well, he should move back with tempo and attack that, and then just try to slowly get the better position. I mean, for example, if black runs over there, then you've got this move attacking here. Pretty soon this guy's going to be hanging, something like, I don't know, maybe like this move with ideas of e4. It's awkward. It's very awkward for black to defend a position like this because his bishop is so much less effective than this bishop, and white has nice outpost squares to occupy. It's kind of fun though. So this is the only, this is the sort of the last mistake of the game. Basically, very well played game. That move is safe, but kind of pointless because now it really is opposite colored bishops. And white takes that because he wants to get an extra pawn. But if he didn't take that, let's go back. If he didn't take that, if he just moved somewhere, I don't know, here or something, black could just move anywhere, I guess here or something, or there, or anywhere. And this is just opposite colored bishops with no particular prospects for either side, so that would be dead equal. So instead white grabs, black grabs, but it's still even material, and there's no serious weaknesses, and this was drawn shortly. Good game, very high quality game. I thought it was well played. Couple little tactical opportunities missed, but it's a 45-minute game. That's not so easy. So I like the game. I think it was well played, and I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. If Jonathan were here, he might want to comment on it. But anyway, and then on one more game before I continue, unless we've got some more comments here. Oh, yeah, there is. Cool. I looked at some game, white won, Grischuk was involved. Oh, well, let's go back and see what Ellie's got to say here. White won in F5 like 8 years ago. Queen D6 is not so good either. Probably not. No, white was getting a pretty good game there. Thanks to the IM team, I've been seeing E3 more often. Yes, I think black's okay after that. The kimchi. Is that a noodle? Just came back from 2 tournaments, 2 weekends. Excellent. Getting some practice. This is great. Knight D6 might have been premature. No, it's okay. He can just retreat to C4 as it turns out, and he's quite a bit better. So I think Knight C6 was okay, but you're right. He wasn't necessary. White's just better, that's all. He's just got a good game. I'm having trouble scrolling as usual here. All right, folks, so let me show you one other game, because what happens, we tend to get off target talking, and then I don't get around to the games I was sent. And I really want to encourage you guys to send games, because I think it's kind of fun. This is Scott. I don't know who he is on the, hopefully he's here today. I don't know who he is on the ICC or what his whole name is. Playing someone who's not mentioned. Scott is white. And we have a Sicilian defense. Accelerated, this is called an accelerated fianchetto. Now remember the difference between that and the dragon is that in the dragon you're playing, well, actually I won't. We're already past a dragon proper, but you could get a dragon kind of position if somehow, well, if you got moves like this in the right order. That's like a dragon-like position. The difference being that black's committed to D6 and white didn't get C4 in. So the accelerated fianchetto, just for those of you who think they're kind of the same, sometimes act like they're the same, has the one difference that white can play this move, putting a bind on the center, because black didn't get knight F6 in early. And then white defends the center. And so now we have what's called a Maroczy bind. And black plays a move that was popular for a little while. Elliot will remember this. I think Joel Benjamin used to play this. And normally what you do against this is you just play something like castles and then F3 and just develop and try to maintain your bind. And there were some games where black would play some clever things like knight here and try to play knight D6 and play F5 and strange things like that. But in the end, I think everybody concluded white was just a little better in these positions if he played carefully. There's some clever lines where black would try to get an attack with F5 and maybe even sometimes it would succeed, but I think ultimately that's what he's supposed to do. But in this game, white played differently. White played takes, which is probably pretty harmless is my guess. And then here, to avoid the exchange of queens, one technical point here is that it might be a little awkward if black played there because white has to figure out what to do, like where he wants to put his pieces. So that's maybe a little bit of a technical problem with white's move order, but it's not that important. Okay, wins a tempo on the queen. And now knight g4 threatening checkmate here, 2 pieces here. And so white takes that. The only problem now is that black has the bishop pair. On the other hand, white has a lot of space, and he's going to be able to kick that bishop away and maybe even get some control over the d file. So maybe, I don't know if white's better, but he's certainly not worse. Okay, black challenges on the d file. Oh, something kind of interesting happens here. Yeah, this knight d5, this whole plan with knight d5 doesn't work out horrendously well. Here black has a really interesting move. He played to defend the e7 square, but he blocks off his own bishop doing that, so it could be a bit of a problem. This actually turns out works pretty good. This is a computer move. I just threw this on the computer and immediately it popped up with this move, giving away this pawn in two different ways, but they're both bad. If he takes it that way, of course, we have the rook takes, and we're on the bishop, and we're also going to take this off. So we're going to win material. 2 pieces for a rook for only a pawn. But a check is this is the funny one, is knight takes up, and then it looks like white can play this move, and but the computer, of course, ignores this completely, allows white to play check, and just says black's better because he has 2 bishops. He has 2 pieces for a rook, and he has the bishop pair. And it's still an interesting game. But so anyway, that's a little tactic that the computer noticed. Black more naturally played this move, and white retreats. So far it's just kind of an even, complicated game. And white misses a little tactic here. That move turns out to be bad. Not on principle. In principle, it's just fine, but tactically it has some problems. He should simply play a move like this and just keep making moves, basically. Instead, he plays there, and that has problems because of the lining up of the rook and the queen, which means that I think f5. Actually, oh no, there's even a tactic here. You just have to be tactically alert. Remember, every move, look at your checks and your captures and your forcing moves. See if you can do something. There's a nice forcing move to look at, and you might not like that for one reason or another, but once you see that you can do it this way, there's a forcing move, and that's another forcing move. Once you see that, you see it's a double threat to take here and to play f4, and that he can't take because, well, he can take, but he has to worry about this problem here. So that's something black missed, or at least was a little opportunity he should have at least looked at. Played there instead. White played that move. Once again, f5 would be a nice idea, I think. Instead, he took and captured. Here we go. And now white's got what looks like a little bit of an initiative because of rook down. He still has a little more space in the center. This bishop is not a thrilling piece, but it turns out black could play something just very simple here. Yeah, black played there, and really it's easiest to just play a simple move like that. And then if the rook comes down, it just turns out that black has counterattacks here, threats of mate and that sort of thing, and the 7th rank just isn't worth that much. And if the queen comes in, you can do one of a couple things. I guess the easiest one is just take and impose on the 7th rank, and that's just dead even. So that was the best move, e6. Black played here. Now here we're getting to the reason he sent me this game and the question that he asked. The question he asked, by the way, was, let me see. Yeah, he said, I thought I must have had a real advantage with my heavy pieces completely controlling the board, but I wasn't able to turn it into anything. Did I blow it, or did black just defend well? And that's the point that we're getting to in the game. So let me get rid of a few of these sheets here. So that's the point we're getting to in the game, the one he's talking about. And after black makes that slow move, white starts making good moves. That one's pretty good because it gains space. He's thinking about playing there. Even better probably is e5, but he plays e5 anyway. And now white has a lot of good things going for him. This king side's been weakened. This g5 move's not very good. The king f7 move's not very good because the queen can come back over here on these lines. So all of a sudden, white's got some very nice looking chances. And his question was, well, did I mess it up? What happened in this game? That was attacking h7, so he defended it. And then white played here. And I think the question is, you did kind of mess it up because this kind of position is good to know. It's good to know that this is just enough for white to win a game normally. I mean, it depends on the exact disposition of the pieces and all that, but there are just enough weaknesses. You see that square, e6. There's like doubling on the file followed by rook e6. There's pressure on the weak e-pawn. Probably a couple weaknesses like this and control of that open file are enough to win the game, or at least to get terrific pressure going. So anyway, at this point, rook takes g5 is threatened, so black defends. and white plays there. And now this is a case that shows how hard chess is, because I think that's actually a mistake, even though it looks great. Because after this, it's hard to kind of coordinate. Maybe white still got, well, white's still better, but it's hard to prove. Whereas if he had done it this way, that one's tough because it ties black to that pawn. And just to show you, like here, black actually gets to a point where he's almost in zugzwang, because white's threatening to play queen e4 at some point, so you've got to kind of stay on that square. But there's also queen e5 check. Just for example, what did I look at? I looked at if you make a slow move, then queen e5 check, king here, and then one more slow move, and black's got to make a move. Black's running out of, black doesn't have any pawn moves, doesn't really have any rook moves. If the rook moves over here, there's this check. And this is typical of this kind of position, and then white just takes this and wins easily. And where's the queen going to go? Well, the queen wants to stay on that square, because that check followed by either rook g6 or something like that is going to win. But if the queen goes back there, you're losing the b pawn. Anyway, it's interesting to see how having an exposed king and a few weaknesses like this, it's just amazing how often that's enough to lose a game. So this is actually a winning position. But after the game, unfortunately, black played very well. You asked if black defended well, and he did. This turns out to be a tough position. Now, white should probably just try to torture black, just make some extra moves, try to get back to that position with the queen there. Maybe black's able to defend now with perfect play, but white makes it easy. White should play nice and slowly here. Just make a move like that, maybe bring the queen over. Just keep the pressure on for a while and think about how to win later or how to get pressure. You never make it easy for your opponent. That's an easy move to answer, isn't it? If you don't have a concrete win here, then you're actually letting black kind of get out. So at this point, black's okay, because the king's got plenty of room to move around in, and there's a counterattack going on with that move, or maybe even queen over and down here. So at this point, it's probably about equal. It was a good idea for white to try and play queen h7 check, but that's not much of a threat. F3 is okay. There's other moves too for black. He could do it other ways, but this is simple enough. There's no mates here. So he tries check and just comes over. So since there isn't a mate, it's just even material, and things are coming off. And at this point, white very intelligently bailed out, because after all, the king being centralized is actually becoming an advantage. So he just kept checking, and it was drawn. Excellent game, interesting game, and a very good question. Can the heavy pieces win by themselves? Sometimes they can't, but I think in this case, in this game, they actually could have. You actually had just enough advantage to win this game. And it just shows how delicate chess is, that one little move, queen c3 and rook f6, sort of meant that black was just barely able to hang on in spite of his weaknesses. Okay, so let me see what we got on the chat. What do you think of the Trompowsky attack? Okay. Knight is queen d2. I have been reading Gelfand's 2 books. He's not adverse to trading off all the majors. I didn't realize that, but those books are wonderful, I think. Does your mouse have a wheel? Yes, it does, and I am using the wheel to scroll, but it's something to do with the way I've got all these little, I have 2 computers and two other little screens set up to do the show. It's very awkward. I need to practice next time, but thank you, yes. Make that queen d7, rook d7, queen e4, yes, exactly. Why do you think Wesley so has cooled off in his winning ways? What do you think of, why do I think, I just think that goes back and forth. I think Wesley pretty much established that he deserved his high ranking. The funny thing is, when Wesley first had those good results when he came to the US, I thought, well, who knows, maybe it's flash in the pan, he'll be down to 27-20 in another year or two, and we'll always think of him as one of those guys, one of those extremely strong players that really wasn't part of the elite, maybe like a Bacro or somebody, I mean, there's plenty of players like that who are absolutely fantastic, brilliant, but for some reason they're a little bit lower. But Wesley proved everybody wrong, and I don't think there's any question. It's like Vashyr-Lagrov. Vashyr-Lagrov a couple of years ago went all the way down to, I think, 27-20, maybe 30 something, and but he'd already been up long enough that I kept thinking this just isn't going to stay there. He's just going to come back, and he did. He came zooming back up. He even got all the way up to 2,800, and I think Wesley will do just fine. Now, is he the second best player in the world? That's a different question. I'd have no idea. Seems to me that at that level, as at any level, you have your times where you're playing better, your times where you're a little lucky because your opponents choose the wrong openings or play poorly. They all seem roughly equal except for Carlsen, who always seems just a little bit better. But they all, and Carlsen, of course, is coming back to the pack a little bit in a fairly consistent way. So it seems like they're much closer to Carlsen right now. Right now, Aronian's really hot. But remember, we just went through 2 years where Aronian, as brilliant as he is and as good as he is, and it's not like he lost that much ground, wasn't the most impressive of the contenders. Um, a few years before that, Hikaru looked like he could be the #1 contender. At least to me, he did, and still can be. I think. I think all of these players are just absolutely amazing. And I mean, heck, even Kramnik came back to #2 in the world very recently. Um, so I just think Wesley's going through a bad stage. He may have had a bad attitude in one or two of the tournaments. He may have just gotten unlucky with the choice of openings. He may have been tired. You just have no way of knowing. It's a very temporary thing. What is it? 3 tournaments? We're not talking about a huge pattern yet. But a good question. Okay, what do you think of the Trompowsky attack of the Vaganian Gambit? Okay, so here's the Trompowsky, which somehow, along with the London, I seem to look at way too much. It's just played constantly by everyone. Okay, so we're looking at the this line, and Vaganian came up with this gambit of playing here, or maybe he wasn't the first one, but anyway, it's called the Vaganian Gambit, giving away this pawn, and then because this is hanging, and because you can't really move the knight efficiently. It looks like black's doing great, but there's this very nice little move here protecting this. And now the idea is simply e4, e5, maybe even f4, e4, e5, knight f3, and bull. You're only one pawn down. You get extra tempi with the move rook b1. In fact, you have an immediate threat of rook b1 and knight b5, I think, winning, right? I mean, if he played a slow move, this would win by force, right? Because knight b5, there's no queen a5 defending the c7 square. So that would be winning. So what does black do? Okay, so what's the question? The question is, what do you think of this gambit? Well, black almost always comes back queen b6. I suspect there are other moves, but I don't know what they are. This just looks awful. I don't know that for a fact, but maybe not that awful. But I would think white might play f4 now, just get really ambitious. Anyway, let's go back and look at queen b6. Queen b6 is the move that everyone plays and has played for 20 years now, 20 or 30 years. That's the only move they ever play, so it must be a pretty good one. And then I think, okay, so e4 is usually played to play e5. One thing that people discovered early on, and they often even give a question mark to this move, rook b1, because the idea is it forces the queen to a better square, either on c7 or d8. So rook b1 is often criticized. I don't think it's that bad, but the point is it just doesn't achieve enough. It doesn't really tie black to the b pawn. And so usually white plays e4 first. White saves rook b1 for the right moment. He may not play it at all. And then black usually plays d6, although I think you can play e5 already now. Is that right, everybody? Yes, you can play e5 right away. Or you can play d6 followed by e5 next move. Those are the two most popular defenses, I would say. In the early days, black would simply develop and let white attack, but white kept just bowling over black's position. I mean, he's way ahead in development. He has huge amounts of space, and he's only a pawn down. So one way to react is to counter the space, counterattack, to grab some space yourself in the center. And my understanding of this position, okay, first of all, this position, f5, I know Cyrus Lactawala adores f5 instead of either takes a knight f3 or knight f3. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm a little unconvinced. When I looked at f5, I thought black was still okay. The idea is that it's hard for black to get g6 in without some pawn roller attacking him. So basically in this position you have a choice of either f5 or knight f3, and nobody likes the move rook b1. Again, I can't. All I can say is it seems to help black's defense without helping white's attack enough. But I'm even skeptical of that. I mean, it's got to be a good move in some sense. It's got to have some positive aspects to it. Don't know what do you think, Thylaful? What do you think of the Vaganian Gambit? Anyway, I'd say this is now the main line, this position here. And maybe some of the books give f5 exclamation point and some are sort of more neutral about it. I mean, I would tend, I think, try to keep it flexible, and even if you do think it's an equal position, so what? White's got plenty of attacking chances here. He's going to try to attack along the file. There'll always be plenty of things for white to try to do. On the other hand, there are people that are fairly comfortable with black in this kind of position. I think you'll find the winning percentages in megabase are very good for white, but that's because black took a while before he figured out how to play this position. So anyway, okay, maybe that's the beginning of it. I think the trump, by the way, I think it is totally sound. There's no refutation. I don't think black is ever better if white plays well. On the other hand, I'm not so sure white's better if black defends well. Okay, and Alan's talking about his Grandmaster game. Oh no, he played a longer Grandmaster game. What does that mean, a slow move? You're asking me which is slow, or you're asking somebody else what a slow move is. Basically, a slow move is something where probably it's not, yeah, it's not attacking anything. It's not active. It doesn't bring a piece to a position where it has a lot of threats or threatens to become really active. Slow tends to, often you use the word slow because you're in a position that you want to attack. And for example, that poison pawn Najdorf, for example, white had given up a pawn. So there's a tendency you want to do really quick things to make up for the fact that you're pawn down, like attack, like Elliott's E5s and F5s and those kinds of moves. So when you say a slow move, it's often to compare it with a more active move. In other words, you might say, well, that's a little slow as a criticism, and sometimes it's slow because the position calls for something more active. But there's nothing wrong with a slow move in theory. Playing slowly is fine, as long as it's sound, and as long as there's no reason that you have to attack something. No, I think a slow move can defend something, Thylaful. I think sometimes a slow move can defend something and be perfectly, perfectly fine, even though it's slow. But it usually won't attack anything, you're right. Okay. Well, okay, hey, we're on another pause here on the chat, I think. Did I miss anything else in the chat? Let me just see. Yeah, no, I think we're okay on the chat now. Keep those questions coming on the chat, and I will show you another game. Oh, I have a long question. Maybe I should do this because people like these general questions. Of course, I might bore you to death. But there are a lot of players. I get questions like this by email, and a lot of times I have to admit they seem difficult to answer, and I'm afraid some people won't relate to them. But maybe I should once in a while. Okay, here's an adult beginner. As an adult, I'm told not to learn any openings, but study tactics, as most games at my level are lost in the middle of an end game due to a blunder by an opponent. I do find this to be true in my limited experience. Okay. So let me just address that first of all. I think that's true, but I think we've talked about the fact that just studying tactics doesn't always seem to help that. People who we've gone through this quite a few times, but studying, a lot of even my students and other people, when they study tactics, they don't seem to get any better at tactics. I like the idea of studying tactics in context as much as possible, rather than just going through a lot of tactical exercises. Find your tactics in the middle of playing over your own games, other people's games, opening study, middle game study. Learn your tactics in context. I think that really helps because that sort of gives you the rhythm for how tactics occur, when to look for them, and also sort of more typical tactics. So just studying, for example, chess tempo or something like that, I haven't found to be very helpful for my students. Just personally, I'm not a big fan of just looking at countless problems, although looking at some is certainly useful, certainly good for you. But I just wouldn't get obsessed with looking at tactics all the time. I don't think it works out very well in terms of actual improvement. Okay, what else did he say? This statement is qualified by the follow-up statement, don't study openings, learn the principles. As GM Larry Evans states in his book, How to Open a Chess Game, quote, it's not important to memorize detailed opening variations. Concentrate on applying sound general principles and you will rarely go wrong. So that's the traditional line, right, given in some of the older instructional books. I don't know if it's still always phrased that way. But the problem, of course, is what principles? What principles are we talking about? What principles actually apply to openings? So he goes on to list the ones that Evans gives. And they're okay for beginners. I wouldn't say that Ron's already 1350. He's getting at the post-beginner stage for sure. That's well past beginner in my opinion. So at that point, I think principles become less important. But anyway, let's talk about the principles that he talks about. I think for a beginner, it is okay to think in terms of the generalities that Evans gives. But you might want to forget them as quickly as you can. But they're good because you need some context. You need some way to be able to get a game, not just get killed quickly, and just kind of get your pieces out and figure out how to get some sort of rhythm and get some experience without the humiliation of just losing all your pieces early in the game, or getting checkmated or something. So anyway, um, one of the best things about the study of concrete examples is that you learn how to handle positions, and you don't have to refer to sort of general abstract rules, verbal rules. But to start with, I think these aren't so bad. Anyway, here are the principles he talks about. Always play to dominate the middle of the board, occupy, attack, or watch the center. The sides and the corners are lifeless. This is Evans talking. I guess I don't understand that the sides and the corners are lifeless, but I don't think that's true at all. But basically, it's a pretty good rule, especially for beginners. But even for somewhat more advanced players, when in doubt, looking at the center is a pretty good thing to do. I mean, the center is the most important part of the board in a majority of cases in chess, and it doesn't hurt to keep an eye on the center, especially when you're a little confused about what to do. Don't forget that the center is extremely important. Um, Now, of course, there's a million exceptions, but I think it's a very healthy way of thinking that will help you play in positions where especially ones you haven't seen before. Okay, number 2, develop all your pieces fast, not just one or two. The opening is a race for rapid and continuous development. The aim of the development is to connect the rooks so they can occupy central posts for the middle game and seize open files. Okay, so I would forget about the rooks and open files part, but basically getting one of the very common beginner errors is just not get your pieces out. You take too long getting the pieces out, and you get bowled over by your opponent whose pieces are swarming all over you. So yeah, why not? The third one is castle early. This brings the king to safety and a rook into play. Conversely, try to prevent your opponent from castling if possible without sacrificing material. Well, there's plenty of exceptions, but you'll learn them when you study concrete openings anyway. So it's fine to get castled early when you're a beginner especially. Don't sacrifice material unless you see a way to get it back or force checkmate. I mean, even for a beginner, I don't know if that's very good advice. I think if you can get activity or an attack, or you can give your opponent a lot of different weaknesses and all you've done is sacrificed a pawn or something, that's okay. Go ahead and do it. I guess I disagree with that. I think even at a fairly early stage, you can start looking for reasons to be a pawn down or 2 pawns down. Don't lose time by moving the same piece twice. Of course, in most openings that you study, you're going to move at least one piece twice or even 3 times. But the basic principle is the same. It's a beginner's principle. It's get your pieces out as quickly as possible and get safe. Okay, make few pawn moves, only enough to free your pieces. The only thing about that is that there's so many openings, these are supposed to be opening principles, where you move your pawns to attack your opponent's pieces, and therefore you gain time, and therefore you aren't. It's okay to move pawns, you're not even losing time. But the basic principle is don't move too many pawns because you won't be developing your pieces. The next one is develop your knights before your bishops. In my opinion, that only applies to a couple classical openings, and these days, even in those classical openings, it's not even true. Half the time you develop your bishops first, so I just ignore that one. Avoid early queen adventures, develop minor pieces, knights and bishops before major pieces, queens and rooks. Again, there are going to be a million exceptions as you study actual openings, but the basic idea is don't get your queen out and make so many queen moves that you just your queen keeps getting attacked and you don't get your other pieces out. The next one is avoid giving useless checks. It's a very odd piece of advice. I would say that you should avoid doing anything useless. Why would you do something that's useless? So it's kind of a silly piece of advice. And then the last, especially, you're writing a book and you're putting out these principles, you should at least be a little careful how you phrase things. I mean, it's a pretty silly thing to say, giving useless checks. Why give useless anything? Why make any useless moves? Okay, assume that your opponent will find the right moves and don't play for crude traps except in desperation. And of course that applies to the entire game, not just the opening. You don't play for crude traps unless you can't find anything else to do. Okay, so Ron then says about our program that your Ask the Master program on YouTube is helpful, but many people ask for details about particular openings or specific variations or specific instances. I watch the programs taking time to apply the principles or fundamentals to the moves shown, yet in the answers to the questions, the principles appear to be violated many times by moving pawns multiple times, castling very late, etc., and yet the moves work out. That's absolutely true. In real openings, in the real world, especially with our pretty sophisticated audience that we have here, you'll find out that that's very often these rules are all violated without any compunction. And that's just the fact of chess. That's why studying concrete openings in the end is what you'll end up doing. You won't worry about these principles. Okay, with that as a preface, I have 3 questions. I'll try to go through this quickly. Which openings are the most in line with the principles listed above? And while it might be all openings, my question is really which openings are the principles more obvious to a beginner to follow and learn the patterns? So I guess I think you're best off weaning yourself from the principles by studying specific openings. But if you do want to sort of look at where Evans' principles apply, it's going to be the 1E4, E5 openings and the 1D4, D5 openings, which is where people kind of came up with this idea for those principles anyway. Well, actually, they came up with them in the end game more than anywhere else, but that's another story. Or 1D4, D5. So if you want openings where those principles apply the best, I think these would be the ones to look at. Just start out with those and look at those. The next question was, is there any value for me in learning the details of a particular opening or variation as my playing strength is about 1350, or should I stick to principles for now? I think you'll learn far, far more about chess in general, and of course also chess openings, if you study specific openings in detail and you actually look at actual best play and games by good players. At some point, learning by concrete examples is the only way to go. That's how you'll really learn. That's the only way you'll get better. And if the answer to question 2 is yes, is there then which openings and in what order should I learn them? And I guess I'd say that's completely up to you. Which openings do you feel comfortable with? Which do you have fun studying? Which ones appeal to you? Which ones are interesting? I mean, these D4, D5 openings on E4, E5 tend to be maybe a little more exciting or open, and you get your pieces out more quickly sometimes. But if you want to study strategic openings, you can study things like the King's Indian and the Nimzo Indian and these kinds of things, with the bishop coming out or the bishop coming out this way. Or maybe against E4 you can play the Caro-Can, nice closed kind of opening, or the French defense, or not necessarily closed, but strategic. You might want to play French defense. You might want to play Pierce defense even. There's all kinds of things you can do. So it's kind of up to you. See what you're most comfortable with. Look around a little bit. Choose an opening. Study it. And if you get tired of it, just move to another one. Try a different one. Okay, sorry for that lengthy delay, but I thought it might be of interest to people. I get quite a few questions like that. Okay, let's see. Go back here. Oh, whoa. That was a long, long answer. Whoa, look at this. Say that again. I want to memorize that exactly. Oh my God, look at this. Okay, we did the Trompovsky-Vaganyan. That was way back then. Then we talked about slow moves. The game went, okay, one of Alan's games. Now we do this pretty much every week with Alan, so I think I'll skip that and see if there's other questions, Alan, and we'll get back to it. If nothing else, we'll get back to it next week because I'll copy the chat. When I play the Sicilian Najdorf and White Castle's queenside, I have big difficulties dealing with White's pawn storm on the king side. How to deal with that? If I play h6, okay, so this is the bishop e3 line with this h6 thing that you're talking about. This is not with f4 for white, because white probably wouldn't sacrifice his bishop. Bishop takes h6. So yeah, he's talking about the Sicilian Najdorf. I think the question, you have to get more specific. Why don't you, Thyleful, give me a specific example? That's much better. He's basically saying what I've said about castling queenside in any opening, d4 openings, e4 openings, whatever, which is that it's basically risky. It's a very small percentage of games where white castles, now usually f4 is played. I think you're probably talking more about lines where white plays, you might even be talking, I'm sorry, you might be talking about this. You're probably talking about English attack things, this kind of thing. Right, and after white plays g4, if you play h6, they can sacrifice for it, that kind of thing. Castling queenside is risky. You have to know, if you're going to play any opening where you castle queenside, and it's a standard opening, you're probably subjecting yourself to some kind of attack, and the bet is that you will first get a huge positional advantage or an attack yourself before your opponent's attack gets there, or maybe you'll get the better endgame, or you'll get something out of it. But there's an inherent risk to castling queenside in almost any opening, and that's why you see so few queenside castling for either white or black relative to kingside castling. So, so I can't answer your question. You should send me at askiamwatson@chessclub.com. Send me some examples, and I'll be glad to address that question. Queen e1 was regarded as dubious. Oh, that's in your game. I'll check that out later. Let's do this first, though. Like Kasparov, who didn't castle. Yes, you don't have to castle. You can play h5 to stop g4. Okay, so we are talking about bishop e3 lines. Yeah, you can, for example, in some position like this, when white goes here or something, you can very soon play play a move like h5 to stop g4, g5. I mean, I just did a very terrible example, but anyway, you get the idea. The idea is that, yeah, so that is a fairly popular way for black to play. White's usually pretty happy with that too. Maybe black's playing here. But the idea is to stop that move instead of waiting for this and then castling into an attack. That's the one thing you don't want to do, right? That's what you're saying. You don't want to castle into that attack. And you probably wouldn't sacrifice immediately, but the idea is there. It's a very dangerous idea. So the answer to that is, yeah, you could not castle. You can simply develop your pieces first. Sorry about that. Whoops. You can develop your pieces first, and a lot of people do that, right? We see this all the time. That maneuver was very popular for a while with the knight here, the queen here. You just don't castle into the attack. So white attacks anyway, usually, with the idea of playing h5 and g6 and bishop h3, but the general question is a good one because it's too late a lot of times if you've castled kingside and played h6. So you really there's not much you can do about it. Najdorf here, Najdorf there. Why don't we see the Petrov anymore at the very top level? I think we do. We still see it. Oh no, there have been a fair number of games at the top level. If you mean in Super Grandmaster tournaments over the last year, I don't know if you've noticed yet, but every year Super Grandmasters take up a different set of openings and they play almost exclusively those openings. So you don't see any openings at the top level, really. You just see a couple. But in the long run, you'll see them all. And the Petrov's been played a lot at the top levels, and so has every other opening. So is even the Caro-Kann, the French, or all these openings. You'll see a ton of if you look at years of top-level practice. But it's faddish. For example, in the last year and a half, it just seems like half of the games have gone like this. For many years, all we got was Sicilians. We just got Sicilian after Sicilian after Sicilian. There were several years there where every top player, all they would ever play is d4. Just that was it. I mean, they just wouldn't. And then there were years where all you would see is Nimzo-Indian defenses. And then there were years later on where all you would see is Slav defenses or semi-Slav defenses. So it's all fashion, and it depends what. No, it's not really drawish. The Petrov, no, I don't think it's drawish at all. I think because for one thing, there's so many different lines you can play for white. Yeah, by the way, what is the Petrov? We should show you that. That's this. And I think you'll find that there is no such thing as a drawish opening when there's still every piece on the board and almost all the pawns and not even any tension, anything unsymmetrical, and this becomes unsymmetrical. We've talked on this show a fair amount about the Petrov. We've talked about this line. For example, we've talked about this one a bit. Several questions about this one. And that's been doing pretty well, but on the other hand, black's still playing this, so it's okay for either side. But it's unsymmetrical, so you would hardly call this drawish. This can lead to all kinds of interesting play. Yeah, I don't think top players think they can force a draw with black just by playing the Petrov or anything like that. I've done a study in the Austrian attack of the Pirates. That's kind of cool. I could use some information about the Austrian attack. I guess that goes with the Caro-Kann to get a draw. No, not at all. None of these openings are draw. If they were all so drawish, then you'd have a bunch of 2,500 players that every time they played a top player, they would just play this supposedly drawish opening. They'd draw them and they'd gain all kinds of rating points. It just doesn't work that way. Caro-Kann, same thing. There's tons of pieces left. I mean, how could you possibly think you're already drawing in this position or something? You're already, somehow it's drawish. I mean, look at all these pieces. There are infinite possibilities here. I think people really overrate the idea of a drawish opening. Okay, let me see. My birthday, it's jam. Lots of arrows. I love arrows. Chinese players play a Petrov a lot. I didn't know that actually. The Chinese like that. Ruy Lopez Berlin. Now that's interesting. Ruy Lopez Berlin is one of those openings that maybe you could almost call it drawish. Of course, it's a little further into the game, but the main line of the Ruy Lopez Berlin. This is actually very interesting. I think at the 2,800 levels, anywhere else, of course, that's not drawish at all. But this particular position, it's actually kind of interesting. That I think one reason I say this is I heard Nakamura say this, that every line of this ending is a draw, and he's not the type to say something like that. So it's extraordinarily hard for white or black to win this position if the other player plays halfway decently. And of course, 2,800 players play awfully decently. Now they still win. I mean, there have been some wins recently for white against this, but if there's ever been a drawish opening, this arguably is one of them. Now, for you guys, or for anybody up to 2,600, It's not going to be drawish at all because you can just come up with, it's just going to be the skill of the players. But oh yeah, every opening is interesting. I mean, I'd say even a 2,600 player is going to beat a 2,400 player most of the time, or arguably as many times as he's supposed to, according to their ratings, in this position as white or black. That's my guess. So even this position isn't drawish in that sense. But it is true that at the very, very top levels, I mean, there was this wonderful game in the Sinkfield Cup where on move 30 or so, white was putting his king on h5. Do you see that game? There was this passed a pawn for black. And Anand after the game said, "Oh yeah, 5 years ago we looked at that position. It was like move 30 or something, and it's just equal." It's just horrible. And this was in the Berlin. It's in this variation, and the position you see before you. They'd worked it out to move 30 something, and so that was kind of funny. Okay, what do we have here? E4, E5. Let's do this because Alan, we'll get to yours next week probably. We've looked over the years here. We've looked at a lot of your games, so we'll wait on that one a little bit. Get somebody else's. Okay, so here's Roy Lopez. A6, bishop c5. Bishop c5 was enormously popular for a while. Castles d6. C3, queen f6. Oh, I remember you. You play these lines. You were talking about how you play these lines. H3. I don't know how many people would play H3 here. First of all, you're almost, I mean, D4 must be the best move here, right? How does black meet this? This looks like big trouble to me. I guess bishop back. And then if you're, what about queen d5 and bishop g5? Bishop g5, queen d6 stops mate. Wow. These are sort of standard ideas for white. I don't think you want to go into these. Looks like white just won a pawn for nothing with a big attack. Yeah, so d4 is really trouble. If you take it, you're giving up the center completely. That's got to be extremely risky because of e5 moves and d5 moves. Yeah, this position looks absolutely awful. So what's Raman? I think you want to change your move order. That's my first discussion here. Raman, let me see. Oh, this was a Karyakin game? MVL versus Karyakin? Really? Okay. D4, we can take that pawn. Yeah, I think you gave the wrong move order too. This is just too strong. Yeah, maybe b5 first. b5 a long time ago. Let's say b5 even before bishop c2 can be something like this. And now queen f6, right? That makes more sense because now this move might be good, but at least bishop g5 is not the end of the world, right? Just maybe back. And this is no big deal. This doesn't do that much, does it? Oh wait, d takes e. Ooh. Ouch. Okay. Well, maybe you have to take this. Oh, I don't like this because you've got knight takes d4 and bishop d5. This looks bad too. Wow. Okay, bishop b6, bishop g5. Queen g6 is forced. Takes. And how do you answer this? I don't like it. I don't like it. So we'll find, oh, b5 and then queen f6. Yeah, I just looked at that, Raman. We'll figure it out. You know what you can do? Ask IM Watson at chessclub.com. ASKIM WATSON at chessclub. Send me an email and we'll talk about this variation. We'll get it right. We'll get the right order and talk about it. It looks like fun. I'm trying to strong point e5. MVL versus Karyakin. For example, if we can find that game, that'll really help. Yeah, so his idea here was to play h6 and g5. Let's just assume white couldn't play that. Let's say white attacked on the queen side or something. Whoops, that's actually a pretty good move. Let's go slow here. The idea here was to play like this and then castle queen side and attack. Maybe even play like this. And that's kind of a cool idea. You get that in a lot of different openings. The question is when can it actually work? And by the way, h6, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe he played h6 now. I don't know, possibility. Okay, so Roman, why don't you just send me an email and we'll get the right order for that, and we'll talk about it next week because it could be a good question. Okay, what is the most worrying line for black in the Budapest? I think there's several, but the one I used to play, I never gave up on. The books even a lot of them used to give it as a suggestion for white, and then a lot of the books on the Budapest keep trying to pretend it's okay for black. But I played this for years, and I don't think black ever really equalized. Now there's two moves. The Budapest proper is this. I assume that's what you're talking about. This is the Fajarowicz, and we can talk about that separately. A lot of people like this move, for example. And then there's these beautiful rook sacrifices for black, but in the end, I think white's better. Anyway. Oh, this line, which Karpov played, for example, many years ago, and everybody's played since then. I just think, in the end, white's better in these positions. The main line goes something like this. Black gets his pawn back with, I'm sorry, knight f3. Black gets his pawn back with queen e7. White plays there, and these guys go off, and white plays. Sometimes white actually plays a3 and loses that tempo. I used to just go here. Looks like a3 wastes a tempo, but it's actually a pretty good move too. If you look at Tim Taylor's book, white, which is suggested for black, it's Budapest Gambit for black. White ends up being better in both those lines, in my opinion. Okay. I like the Nimzowitsch-Larsen attack modern variation. I don't know which one is modern. I doubt if it's drawish. The Nimzowitsch-Larsen attack is usually considered this, b3. Is that the one you're talking about, moving Dutchman? You might want to be a little more specific. Give me some moves. Okay. Berlin is just considered stronger for black at top level right now. I don't know about stronger, but anyway. But good enough to draw or get an even game. And it seems to be a bit of a drawing weapon, which contradicts what I was saying about when you still have a lot of pieces left. It's silly to talk about a draw, but the Berlin might be one exception to that. Yeah, that's the funny thing, Tom. Very good question. That's what was so silly about this game, is that the Berlin is a positional opening, but white has a certain limited number of tries before black gets the kind of position where the two bishops start to assert themselves. So within those tries, they've worked out things to an incredible detail with computers. It is crazy. You're absolutely right. It seems crazy to me, too. Take a look at the game. Let me see if I can remember what game it was. Darn. Look at the Sinkfield Cup. Berlin. Look at a Berlin. There was only one Berlin that I remember right. There's a game where white marches up on the king side, plays g4 and h5. Oh, he ends up isolating the h-pawn with g takes h6, g takes h6, and then he plays king up to h5. And black, in the meantime, gets a pass pawn on the queen side with a5, a5, a4. Karyakin was black, I believe. Karyakin was one of the two players, and I wish I could remember who it was. But take a look at that game, and you'll see what I mean. It's absolutely amazing. It turned out the exact position after move 25 or so had been played several times. It was just incredible. And you're right. Positional openings, that's not supposed to be the way it works. Positional openings are supposed to be, yeah, maybe move 14 or 15 or something, and then someone makes a new move, or at least there's 4 different plausible good moves. But in the Berlin, there are quite a few lines where really there's only one way to really try for a win. And so, in a way, the lines are positionally forced, if that makes any sense. Very good point. Okay, adios. Okay, bye, John. Okay, I guess we go back to Alan's game, or we can just call it quits. I think we should call it quits. I think we're at a good stopping point. We looked at 3 games today. That's good, right? Or did I show you that other game? Did we get through that other game? Oh, maybe we didn't. Anyway, we looked at some games, got some questions, and I answered that question about the beginners, and I'm sorry to do that because most of you guys are not beginners, but I think it's good once in a while to address some of those general questions, especially because so many people tell you not to study the openings, and they're usually the ones who spent their whole youth studying openings, and they're now grandmasters, and they still spend all their time studying openings, but they tell all the students not to do it, even though that's all they ever did. One of my pet peeves. All right, folks. Thanks, everybody. It was kind of fun, and as usual, very sophisticated questions. Remember to send me more emails. I'm not getting that many. I'm getting some games, which is great. But if you have questions, they're a lot easier to ask by email because you can, give me more specific moves. Like that Najdorf question is a great one. The whole question about getting attacked on the king side with the pawn storms and bishop takes h6. That's a great question. I just need a little more detail. I need a little more, like an example to move off of. Okay, folks, thanks everybody, and I will catch you all next week.